It is the spring of 1900, and the air smells faintly of starch, polish, and restraint. This is the moment before the shutter closes, before history decides what it will remember and what it will pretend never existed. The family is already posed, already rehearsed in stillness, their bodies stiff as if movement itself might be a moral failure. The parlor is modest but deliberate. Pressed wallpaper climbs the walls in a faded pattern meant to suggest refinement. Heavy curtains are drawn tight, not for elegance but to keep the street out, to protect the interior world from unwanted eyes. A carpet muffles footsteps as if even sound has been taught to behave. The furniture is arranged for balance, not comfort. Every object seems to know its place, and every person is expected to do the same. This is not a room built for warmth. It is built for appearances. At the center of the frame sits the father. His posture is upright, his shoulders squared, his jaw clenched just enough to suggest discipline without anger. He is dressed in his best coat, brushed carefully, buttons aligned. He looks forward, not at the camera but through it, as if already imagining how this image will be seen by others. Respectability rests heavily on him, and he wears it well. Beside him sits the mother, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes lowered. Her face is calm, almost empty, the practiced calm of someone who has learned that questions only create more silence. She does not look at the camera. She looks down as though obedience has taught her where safety lies. At the edges of the photograph stand the children, one on each side, placed like punctuation marks to complete the sentence of family. They are clean, quiet, obedient. Their shoes are polished. Their hair is neatly combed. They know better than to fidget. Children in this era are trained early in the art of not taking up space. They stare forward, their expressions unsure, caught between curiosity and caution. They are old enough to understand rules, but not old enough to understand why those rules feel so heavy. And then there is the eldest daughter. She stands just behind her mother, slightly off-center, as if uncertain where she belongs. Her dress is simple, carefully mended. Her hair is pulled back tightly, not for fashion but for control. She looks toward the camera, but her eyes do not hold it. There is something withdrawn in her expression, something already tired. She is young but not carefree. She has learned something too early, something she has never been taught how to name. Behind her, resting lightly yet unmistakably on her shoulder, is a hand. At first glance it appears harmless. Many who have seen the photograph over the years did not notice it at all. The hand blends into the shadows, its presence softened by age and grain. But once seen, it cannot be unseen. The angle is wrong, the placement is too intimate, too deliberate. The fingers are long, resting with a confidence that does not belong to a parent offering comfort. This is not a gesture of affection, it is a claim. The hand does not belong to the father. The distance is wrong, the reach unnatural. It does not belong to the mother. Her hands are folded, her posture fixed. The hand belongs to someone just outside the frame, someone whose body was never meant to be included, someone whose presence was never intended to be documented. A person close enough to touch but far enough to deny. In 1900, photographs were not casual things, they were events. Expensive, formal, rare. Families prepared for them as they might prepare for a visit from the church or the law. Clothing was chosen carefully. Expressions were rehearsed. Photographs were proof. They were treated like sworn testimony, evidence that a family existed as it claimed to exist. Ink could fade. Stories could change, but images endured. They carried authority. This photograph was taken by a local photographer, a man who had seen many families sit beneath his lens. He noticed details others missed, the way people held their breath, the way hands betrayed truths faces tried to hide. When he saw the hand on the girl's shoulder, he hesitated. His finger paused over the shutter. He understood instinctively that something was wrong, but he also understood the rules of the world he lived in. Questions were dangerous, silence was currency, and truth, when spoken too soon, often punished the speaker more than the sinner, so he said nothing. The shutter closed. Light burned the image onto the plate. The moment became permanent. The photograph was developed, carefully mounted, and placed into an album bound with cracked leather. It joined birth notices, wedding portraits, and funeral cards. It became part of the official record of the family. Over the years, the album traveled with them. It survived moves, fires, and the slow decay of time. Pages yellowed, corners curled, but the image remained intact. The girl did not. In later years, no one spoke her name. It appeared only once in the parish ledger, written in careful script, then never again. She did not marry. She did not die where her family could mark the grave. Her absence became ordinary, accepted without explanation. Families were good at that. They learned how to continue without acknowledging what had been removed, but the hand remained. It rested on her shoulder, frozen in time, claiming space it was never meant to hold. Decades passed. The house changed owners. The street changed names. Children grew old and told different stories about their past, but the photograph endured, patient and unyielding. Those who looked at it saw what they wanted to see. A respectable family. A moment preserved, proof of stability. Only a few felt the unease without understanding why. Only a few sensed that the stillness in the image was not peace but pressure, that something had been pressed flat beneath the surface. Photographs do not lie, but they do wait. They wait for eyes willing to look closely. They wait for time to dull the fear that once kept people quiet. They wait for someone to notice the details that were always there. The hand was one of those details. A small thing, easy to dismiss, impossible to explain away once truly seen. The girl's shoulder carries more than a touch. It carries a warning, a record of power exercised without witnesses, a reminder that history often hides in plain sight, protected by manners and silence. The photograph never shouted, it never accused, it simply existed, holding its truth with the patience of paper and light. And so the image remained, sealed into family history, carrying a weight few understood. A truth pressed flat, not erased, not forgiven, just waiting. Waiting for someone someday to feel the heaviness of that hand and ask the question no one dared to ask when the shutter first closed. In 1900, power did not knock before entering a room. It did not clear its throat or wait to be invited. It moved as though it belonged everywhere, as though walls and doors had been built for its convenience. In that house, power wore a clean coat and polished shoes. It spoke softly in public and never had to raise its voice to be obeyed. The man who owned the hand was known throughout the town as a benefactor, a patron of the church, a name spoken with reassurance in shop fronts and parish halls. His presence calmed nerves. His donations quieted questions. People said he was generous. People said he was kind. But kindness, when backed by authority, often asks for something in return. The girl did not share his name. She arrived quietly after her mother's death, carrying a small bag and a past no one wanted to examine too closely. In letters exchanged between adults, she was described not as a child in need, but as a responsibility, temporary, a burden that would one day be passed along. She was given the smallest room, tucked away at the back of the house where the light came late and left early. The room smelled of old wood and dust, a place meant for storage rather than rest. She learned quickly how to make herself small. She learned which floorboards creaked and which doors to close without sound. She spoke only when spoken to. Gratitude was expected of her, not because she was grateful, but because gratitude kept her safe. Silence was not suggested, it was demanded. During the day she moved through the house like a shadow, careful not to interrupt the rhythm of those who truly belonged there. Servants noticed her, of course. They noticed everything. They noticed the way she stiffened when footsteps approached behind her. They noticed the way her eyes dropped when certain voices spoke her name. But servants survived by forgetting. They learned that seeing too much was dangerous. Forgetting became a skill, a form of self-preservation passed down like a trade. The mother of the house sensed that something was wrong. She felt it in the pauses, in the air that thickened after certain silences. But knowledge without power is its own kind of prison. She had learned over years of marriage and expectation that asking the wrong question could unravel more than it repaired. So she folded her hands. She lowered her eyes. She stayed quiet. When the photograph was taken, the hand on the girl's shoulder was not a gesture of comfort. It was not reassurance. It was possession, plain and unhidden to anyone willing to see it. The fingers rested with certainty, as though claiming what already belonged to them. The camera captured it without judgment, silver and shadow preserving a truth no one would speak aloud. The girl did not pull away. Children learned early what resistance cost. They learned which battles left bruises no one would explain and which silences were rewarded. After the photograph, things changed, though no one marked the change openly. A decision was made in quiet rooms behind closed doors. Soon after, the girl was sent away. The explanation offered was thin and shifting. Health, they said. Temperament, necessity. Words chosen carefully so they could mean anything and nothing. She was told it was temporary, just as she herself had been described. She wrote letters at first, careful and hopeful, folding them neatly, sealing them with patience. They went unanswered. Over time, the letters stopped. Her name stopped being spoken at the table. Her place in the house was filled as though it had always been empty. The house itself did not change. The curtains were still drawn. The floors were still swept. The routines remained intact. The man remained honored. His name continued to open doors. His reputation stayed polished. No one questioned the absence. Absence, when explained politely, rarely raises alarm. The photograph remained untouched, resting in its album like a quiet accomplice. Injustices like this rarely announce themselves with violence. They do not arrive shouting. More often they settle into routine. They grow comfortable. They survive on politeness and disbelief, on the shared agreement that looking too closely is impolite. They rely on the comfort of those who benefit from not seeing. In that house, injustice became ordinary. It blended into daily life, into meals eaten without conversation, into nights passed without interruption. The hand stayed where it was, pressed into history unchallenged. Time moved forward as it always does, but it did not loosen its grip. Instead, it strengthened it. Years passed. The town changed in small ways. New faces arrived. Old ones disappeared. But the pattern remained. Respectability shielded memory. Silence protected reputation. The girl's life unfolded elsewhere, unseen, unrecorded by those who had claimed her presence and then erased it. Whatever she carried with her, whatever weight she bore, was hers alone. The house never spoke of her again, yet the photograph waited. It waited through seasons and decades, through births and funerals, through moments when the album was opened and closed without thought. It waited for eyes willing to linger just a moment longer than courtesy required. It waited for a future in which the cost of seeing would finally be less than the cost of silence. Because history does not forget, it only delays. And some truths remain pressed flat, patient and heavy, until time itself can no longer hold them down. It was nearly 40 years later when the truth surfaced, and even then it did not arrive with voices raised or doors slammed. It came quietly, the way old things do, carried by dust and neglect and the slow collapse of what had been carefully stored away. The house was being emptied after a death, not a dramatic one, just the ordinary passing of time that leaves rooms colder and footsteps fewer. The air in the upper floors had not been disturbed in years. It smelled of dry wood, mouse droppings, and paper aging into fragility. Each step into the attic released a soft complaint from the floorboards, as if the house itself remembered more than it wished to give up. The attic had always been a place of postponement. Things were brought there not to be kept, but not to be thrown away either. Old coats, broken furniture, trunks whose keys had been lost and whose contents were assumed to be unimportant. Sunlight entered through a single narrow window, slicing the dust into visible currents that moved like slow ghosts through the air. It was here that the trunk was found, pushed against the far wall, its leather cracked, its metal clasp stoled by rust. No one remembered putting it there. No one remembered opening it. When the lid was lifted, it resisted at first, then gave way with a sound like a breath released after being held too long. Inside were papers tied with twine, the knot tight and deliberate, as if whoever bound them feared they might escape. The paper was yellowed and brittle, the edges soft with age. Some pages crumbled slightly when touched, leaving flakes behind like ash. The handwriting was careful but uneven, the lines wavering in places, not from age but from fear remembered on the page. These were not official documents. They were letters, personal, confessional, and they were hers. The girl from the photograph had become a woman somewhere beyond the reach of that house. She had lived a life no one there bothered to follow, and she had died without ceremony, her grave unmarked, her name absent from family memory. But in these letters she was suddenly present again. Her voice rose from the paper not in anger but in restraint. She did not accuse. She explained. She named dates. She described rooms. She recorded silences with the precision of someone who knew silence too well. She wrote of footsteps in the night and doors that closed too softly to be innocent. She wrote of learning how to hold her breath and how to keep her eyes down. She named the hand. She wrote about the first time it rested on her shoulder, how heavy it felt, how light it pretended to be. She wrote about what followed, about moments that never left bruises where others could see them. She wrote about the cost of speaking and the greater cost of being believed. Her words were simple, chosen carefully, as if she feared that too much emotion might make the truth seem unreliable. She wrote not to be forgiven but to be known. The final letter was never sent. It lay unfinished, the last sentence trailing off as if something had interrupted her hand. The ink had pooled slightly at the end of the line, darkened where tears had fallen and blurred the words. It was impossible to know whether she had stopped because she could not continue or because she no longer saw the point. Folded beneath the letters, wrapped in a piece of cloth to protect it, was the photograph. Time had not softened it. The image was still sharp enough to wound. This time someone looked closely. The hand was unmistakable now. What had once been easy to ignore revealed itself with quiet insistence. The angle, the confidence, the claim. The photograph was no longer a family keepsake. It was evidence. The discovery did not explode into scandal. It did not reach the newspapers or the pulpit. Instead, it moved through the family like damp through walls, slow and unavoidable. Relatives gathered in small groups, voices lowered. Some refused to read the letters at all. They said the past was better left untouched. They said there was no good to come from reopening old wounds. Others read everything, their faces tightening with each page, grief and guilt mingling in ways they could not separate. A few cried quietly, not only for the woman whose voice had been buried, but for the years they themselves had lived under a lie they had never questioned. The respected name did not fall from public favor. There were no announcements, no apologies issued from pulpits or printed in programs, but something shifted. The name cracked not loudly but permanently. It could no longer be spoken with ease. It carried weight now, and weight demands acknowledgement. The church ledger was amended with a careful hand. A name was added back where it had been removed. A small correction written decades too late, but written all the same. Ink has its own kind of courage. The silence that had once protected everyone lost its authority. It no longer felt virtuous. It felt complicit. The photograph was removed from the album and placed alone in a box, separated from weddings and celebrations, from moments that pretended joy without cost. No one destroyed it. No one suggested burning it or tearing it apart. Destruction would have been another kind of lie, an attempt to reclaim innocence through erasure. The photograph stayed intact, heavy with meaning. The hand, once invisible by choice, could no longer be unseen. It followed the readers of the letters into their sleep. It lingered in rooms where nothing else had changed. It asked questions no one had prepared answers for. How many people had known something and said nothing? How many had benefited from the comfort of not looking closely? How many silences had been rewarded? Truth rarely arrives when it can save the innocent. It does not arrive in time to prevent harm or undo damage. More often it comes when the harm has already settled into history, when the people responsible are beyond reach, when the cost of speaking has shifted from danger to discomfort. But even then, truth matters. It alters memory. It reshapes legacy. It gives shape to suffering that was once dismissed as imagination or weakness. The letters did not change the past, but they changed how the past could be carried. The woman was no longer a vague absence, a missing figure explained away by convenience. She had a voice now. She had words. She had a place in the record. That mattered, even if it came too late to bring her peace while she lived. Those who read the letters found themselves listening more closely to old stories. They noticed gaps they had never questioned. They understood, perhaps for the first time, that respectability can be a costume worn to hide damage beneath. They learned that silence is not neutral. It chooses a side. The house itself seemed unchanged, but those who moved through it felt something different. The air felt heavier. The floorboards seemed louder. Rooms once considered harmless now carried an unease that could not be explained away. Memory had shifted, and memory alters space. What was written refused to return to silence. The letters were stored carefully, not hidden, not displayed, but preserved. They became part of a quieter archive, one that did not seek attention but did not retreat either. The photograph stayed with them, no longer a family treasure, but a reminder of what happens when truth is pressed flat and left unattended. History did not thunder its judgment. It whispered it steadily, without mercy. And in those whispers lived the understanding that some names only begin to rest once they are spoken, and some truths, once read, never truly let the living go silent again. Today the house no longer stands, and its absence is easy to miss if you are not looking for it. The street where it once rose has a different name now, one chosen to sound modern and clean, stripped of whatever memory once clung to the ground beneath it. Asphalt covers what used to be floorboards. Glass storefronts sit where windows once watched the street in silence. Children pass by on their way to school, their laughter bouncing between buildings that do not remember anything older than themselves. They walk over a place where a life was once quietly altered, unaware that history sometimes leaves no visible scar. Nothing marks the spot. There is no plaque, no warning, no acknowledgement. History often prefers it this way. Easier to erase a structure than to explain what happened inside it. Easier to rename a street than to carry a story forward. The house disappeared slowly, dismantled piece by piece, sold, rebuilt, forgot. And yet something of it remains, not in brick or wood, but in paper and image, in ink that refused to fade as easily as memory hoped it would. The photograph survives. It rests now in controlled light, stored in an archive where gloves are worn and voices stay low. Scholars study it not because it is unique, but because it is typical. A family portrait from 1900, a familiar composition, respectable faces, still bodies, the kind of image that fills drawers and libraries passed over without much thought. And yet those who pause long enough feel it, the unease, the restraint, the detail that refuses to settle into harmlessness. Historians speak of context. They say such things were common. They say silence was the law of the age, that power operated differently then, that the past must be understood on its own terms. They are not wrong. Context matters, understanding matters, but explanation is not absolution. Common injustice is still injustice even when everyone pretends it is normal. Silence may explain behavior, but it does not cleanse it. The photograph does not shout its accusation. It does not demand judgment. It simply presents itself honest and restrained. The hand on the girl's shoulder is still there. Time has not softened it. If anything, it has grown heavier. What once blended into shadow now stands out with clarity. The longer the image exists, the more it asks of those who see it. What are you willing to notice? What are you willing to admit? The girl's name has been restored in the parish book. It appears now in faded ink, written carefully between lines that were never meant to hold it again. A small correction, easy to miss, but it matters. Names are anchors. Without them, people drift out of memory entirely. With them, even briefly, they exist again. Record no longer pretends she was never there. No monument was raised for her. No stone bears her name. No apology was issued in public or private. History rarely offers closure so neatly. Instead, something quieter happened. Memories shifted. The family story changed shape. The version passed down through generations no longer flows as smoothly as it once did. There are pauses now, hesitations, footnotes where certainty used to be. The respected man is still mentioned, but not without caution. His name no longer moves freely. It carries weight. It invites questions. He is no longer described simply as a benefactor or a pillar of the community. His legacy has edges now, corners that do not soften with time. That is how judgment often arrives, not as punishment, but as complication. The girl, once erased, now exists again in conversation, in research, in quiet acknowledgement. She is no longer just an absence explained away by necessity or temperament. She is a person who endured something unspoken and left behind proof when speech failed her. Her letters are read carefully, not as scandal, but as testimony. They do not ask for sympathy, they ask for recognition. The hand on her shoulder did not vanish with time. It followed the name it once hid behind. It moved from photograph to archive, from album to record. It settled into history like a verdict passed without a courtroom. No sentence was announced. No defense offered. The truth simply took its place among other truths that waited too long to be told. This is how justice often arrives. Late, quiet, undeniable. It does not undo harm. It does not restore lost years or return what was taken. Instead, it loosens the grip of inherited lies. It frees the living from the obligation to protect a false version of the past. It allows memory to breathe. Those who encounter the photograph today do so in silence. They lean closer. They notice details their predecessors were trained to ignore. They understand that history is not only written in grand events and loud moments, but in small gestures preserved by accident. A hand, a pause, a shadow that never quite disappears. The street continues to change. New buildings rise, old ones fall. Life moves forward, indifferent to what came before. But the photograph remains patient and exact. It waits for each new set of eyes. It waits for the next person willing to feel the discomfort of seeing clearly. Some names are buried by power and stay buried because digging feels dangerous. Some truths wait patiently in photographs and letters, trusting time to create the courage that fear once denied. And some hands never let go, no matter how many years pass, until someone finally looks closely enough to tell the truth. The house may be gone. The street may have a different name, but history remembers what people tried to bury. And once remembered, it does not easily return to silence.